Why don't investors invest in your startup? In this video and office hour session, I'm going to give you the number one reason investors will not invest in your startup. I'm going to boil it down to one thing. And it's a concept that I just picked up recently as I was watching Marc Andreessen talk about what their firm VC fund looks for A16Z in terms of founders and how they determine whether or not to make the investment. And he shared this concept called the idea maze, which I subsequently researched and found attributed back to Balaji Srinivasan. I'm sorry if I butchered that name completely. As you know, if you've been sticking around, I butcher names all the time. But it all comes down to this concept of the idea maze. So I'm going to break this down for you, and you can boil it down to the number one reason founders don't get that investment they're looking for. The investors say, no, going to pass. We will pass on this investment. And if you know the reason, you can start to address it and make your startup as fundable as possible. So in this example here, or this image of the idea maze, which I pulled up, you have your founder that's in the middle, and it starts off with the idea. I'm going to just write this in here, idea. So you've got your idea right in the middle. Hey, I got an idea. What happens is you have plopped yourself right into the middle of an idea maze. Balaji, I believe, talks about running towards a maze, but I say that what happens as soon as you have this idea and say, I think I've got an idea to solve this problem or to build this type of startup in this industry, build this type of app or what have you, you are plopped right in the middle of this idea maze. What happens is the further you can get out and navigate that maze, the more investable you are, because this maze is very treacherous. There are twists and turns, and you can end up in dead ends, booby traps, all that stuff. And so what happens is Marc Andreessen was saying they do not invest and pay founders to figure out the idea maze, to navigate the idea maze. And that's where there's this common notion, and I think it's passing these days, but it's still out there, this pop culture idea in startups where if I have an idea and it's going to be an amazing idea, I'm immediately fundable. People will invest in me, which is true for certain types of investors, mainly friends, family, and associates, which we call fools investors, the friends, family, associates, and foolish investors, call them the FFAF investors, because it's foolish to invest in an idea. It's just a bad investment. Sure, there might be tons of asymmetric upside, but just investing in an idea without having the founder navigate out of the idea maze, that's a dangerous proposition. It's a very foolish way to invest your money. Now, have I made those types of foolish investments? Absolutely 100%. But the serious, professional, institutional capital investors are not going to invest in you to figure out what the maze is. What is the maze? Well, it's everything you need to know about the treacherous pathway of doing a startup, running out of capital, mistiming the market, not understanding the users, competition, supply and demand, supply chain, having your technical co-founder decide, I'm going to run away with all the tech, or going way over budget and breaking the bank, or not delivering, having the scope delivered in terms of your prototype MVP, you name it. There's so many different things that can kill a startup right out of the gate. So you put yourself in this idea maze, and what happens is if you can find your way out of the idea maze towards what they call product market fit, or you can at least clearly map out a path to product market fit that investors believe in, well, you're a fundable company. Mark Andreessen, they're not going to invest until you figured out your way out of the maze. Other earlier stage investors might say, you know what, I think you at least be able to figure it out, get through the maze. Now, Mark Andreessen said something really interesting, and I take it to heart. He said that the best founders have spent 5 to 10 years prior to asking for investment in figuring out the idea maze. 5 to 10 years. This goes completely in the face of, I got an idea, I'm going to put it on a napkin and I'm going to make some money. It speaks back to a concept known as domain expertise. The more you've thought through all the twists and turns of the idea maze, the more investable that you are. And usually that occurs by being on the front lines with your users in the industry, the problems that you're trying to solve. Therefore, the more domain expertise you have, the more you de-risk the investment, because you're providing confidence that the investors say, this founder can figure it out. And that includes building a company. Just because you can solve a problem or you can build something techie that solves that problem, something that works, doesn't mean you're the type of person that can build a company. Hiring, like as soon as you're past product market fit, your post product market fit, your past product market fit, now it comes down to your managerial skills, because let's say you get a $2 million investment and you can't hire your engineers. You can't execute on the scale and the expansion that is required. Or let's say competition comes to eat your lunch, take your lunch money at least. Well, what are you going to do about it? Now you've gone from being a founder that just built something to a founder that has to be a manager and a leader. That's a tough way out of this idea maze. And all these factors start to apply. So if you have domain expertise, at least you know how to get through this idea maze. What are the types of things that you're going to figure out? Well, it all starts with, you have an investment thesis or you have an assumption of a unique value proposition. Have you done customer discovery? Have you then done customer validation? Have you actually gone out and figured out what features that you need to build for your unique value proposition so you can immediately get traction? These are all things that, as Mark Andreessen said, is if you've spent the time figuring out and you've gotten through the maze, you're investable. It's as simple as that. You're in the middle of a maze. Can you navigate your way out of it? And that's what we do as advisors. That's what really great accelerators will do. Communities of other founders will do. Help you navigate. Have you figured this out? Have you figured that out? I often will end up with a founder and they'll say, well, what happens now? I don't know. Let's turn the corner in this maze and let's figure out, maybe we hit a dead end. Maybe there's a fork in the road. Maybe there's 3 different ways that we can go. And I'm always telling founders, there are things we don't know. And until we actually trip over them, or we hit that dead end or that crossroads, we won't get to the place where we know what we don't know. And once we know what we don't know, we can start to learn it and then begin to get to the place where we know a few things. And that's the confidence investors need to hear from you. They need to know what you know about getting out of that idea maze. Execution is absolutely important here, but so is the idea. So what happens is these founders or in pop culture will hear, have an idea, it's immediately investable. Doesn't work. Then there's swinging the pendulum in the other direction, saying that ideas are nothing, execution is everything. Well, that's kind of true, but they're both really important. You have to have the right idea. So you got to get into the maze to begin with. Then you have to execute to get yourself out of the maze. And that's how you become an investable founder. If your investor says no, that means they just don't have confidence that you figured out your way out of the idea maze yet. They're going to ask you a lot of questions. I just recently had a founder go and interview at Y Combinator, and I am preparing that founder, or I was prepping that founder with all the questions they could be asking you. Basically, they're going to scrutinize you to see if you know how to get out of the idea maze. They may say, well, what about this competitor and that competitor? And what do you have that's different? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And if you spend 5 to 10 years with your domain expertise working through it, you have answers to those questions. You can say, those people don't know what they're talking about. They haven't considered this factor. I have a secret, a special sauce, something I know that they don't know. And that's what gives the investors confidence. Or if you're applying to get an accelerator like Y Combinator, if you don't have the answer to those questions, most likely you haven't thought through all the twists and turns of the idea maze yet. And that's what founders make a big mistake. What they do is they get into the middle of this idea maze and then they wave their flag and they say, I've got an idea. Someone obviously has to give me money. My job as an advisor is to get you through that idea maze as far as possible to create as much confidence as possible so that the investors will invest in you. That's how this works. Remember, as soon as you have an idea, you're in the idea maze. The further you get through this, the more investable you are. The number one reason investors don't invest is because you have not figured out how to get through the idea maze. Let's do it together. Hope that's helpful.